The night my wife laughed with her boss was the night I realized respect can die long before a marriage does. It happened under a ceiling of gold chandeliers and polished glass at the Crescent Hotel in downtown Dallas, where her company was throwing its annual holiday party like money had never met a limit. Waiters moved through the ballroom with silver trays balanced on their palms, carrying champagne flutes and bite-sized steaks that probably cost more than my first truck payment. Everywhere I looked, there were tailored suits, diamond earrings, loud confidence, and the kind of smiles people wear when they think the room belongs to them. My wife, Lauren, fit into that world like she had been born under those lights. She stood near the center of the room in a dark green dress, one hand wrapped around a crystal stem, her head tilted back in easy laughter. From across the floor, she looked perfect. That was the problem. Perfect can hide a lot. My name is Ethan Cole, and if you had asked anyone in that ballroom who I was, they would have given you some version of the same answer. Lauren's husband, quiet guy, probably lives comfortably because his wife climbed faster than everybody else. The harmless man in the background, the plus one, the one who didn't matter. I had spent years letting people believe that. At first, it felt easier. Then it became useful. But that night, standing alone near a row of floor-to-ceiling windows with the Dallas skyline burning behind the glass, I could feel the old cost of silence pressing down on my chest. I watched Lauren laugh at something her boss said, and even from 20 feet away, I could tell the difference between her polite laugh and her real one. That one was real, sharp, bright, effortless. It landed harder than I expected. Maybe because I still remembered the years before her promotions, before the title, before the private dinners and weekend conferences, and the careful way she started speaking to me in public, like affection had become something she needed to manage. I took a sip of bourbon and let it sit on my tongue. Burn oak. Ice. Restraint. Then I heard his voice. Richard Haynes. CEO. Expensive haircut. Expensive. Watch. The kind of man who filled every room by acting like everyone else had been invited to watch him occupy it. He called my name loud enough to turn heads. Ethan, he said, lifting his glass with a grin that showed too many teeth. There you are. We were just talking about you. A small circle formed around him the way it always does around men, with title and ego. Lauren glanced at me, not with warmth, not with warning, just expectation. Like I should come perform my role. I walked over slowly, calm on the outside, steady as polished steel. Richard draped one arm over the back of Lauren's chair like he owned the air around her. Tell me something, he said, voice rising just enough for nearby tables to hear. What's it like, being married to the hardest working woman in this company? A few people smiled. I kept my expression neutral. He leaned in, enjoying himself now. Must be nice, he said. Having a front row seat to ambition without having to do all the heavy lifting yourself. The laughter came fast after that. Not huge, not explosive, just enough. The kind that slices deeper because it's controlled. Corporate laughter. Educated laughter. Polished cruelty with manicured nails. I felt every set of eyes measuring me, filing me away, deciding what kind of man stands there and takes that from another man in front of his wife. Then Lauren laughed too. Not nervously. Not reluctantly. She laughed like it was safe to. That hurt more than anything Richard could have said. I wish I could tell you I felt anger first. I didn't. I felt clarity. Cold, clean, immediate clarity. There are moments in a man's life when the room changes shape around him, when the music gets thinner, when the lights get harsher, when the truth finally stops asking permission to be seen. I looked at Richard Haynes smiling into his own reflection in the room's admiration, and I looked at my wife standing beside him, beautiful and distant and entirely too comfortable with my humiliation, and I understood something all at once. Neither of them had any idea who I was. Not really. And by this time tomorrow, that was going to become a very expensive mistake. For a second, nobody moved. The music still drifted from the far end of the ballroom, soft piano over the clink of glass, but inside that little circle around Richard Haynes, everything felt sharper, thinner, more exposed. I held his gaze just long enough to make him wonder whether I had heard the insult clearly. Then I smiled. Not warmly, not bitterly, just enough to confuse him. Men like Richard know how to handle anger. They know how to handle wounded pride. What unsettles them is composure. Lauren touched my sleeve lightly, the way you calm a situation before it embarrasses you. Richard is joking, she said, her voice smooth, practiced, and just a little too quick. She was not defending me. She was managing optics. There is a difference, and once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. Richard gave a shrug like he was the victim of oversensitivity. Come on, Ethan, he said. We are celebrating. No need to be so serious. A few people around him relaxed, grateful for the easy exit. They wanted the moment to become harmless because that would excuse their laughter. I could have let them have that. For years, I had let people keep their illusions because it cost less than correcting them. But something in me had shifted, quiet and permanent. I looked at Lauren then, really looked at her, at the easy elegance, the polished smile, the eyes that used to search a room for me, and now only seemed to calculate how close I stood to becoming inconvenient. I remembered a one-bedroom apartment in Fort Worth with a window unit that rattled all summer long. I remembered takeout cartons on the floor because we could not afford a dining table yet. I remembered Lauren studying late into the night with her heels kicked off under the couch while I built models on my laptop and took calls in the hallway so I would not distract her. Back then, she used to laugh with me, not at the version of me other people invented. Success did not change us all at once. It changed us by inches. A dinner missed here. A colder answer there. A new tone in public. Less wife and husband. More brand management. Richard was still smiling, but I could see the impatience underneath it now. He had expected embarrassment. He had expected me to either force a laugh or retreat. Instead, I set my glass down on a passing tray and straightened my cuff. You should enjoy tonight, Richard, I said. My voice came out calm, low, almost conversational. Tomorrow may feel different. The smile on his face flickered. It was small, but I saw it. So did Lauren. Her eyes narrowed a fraction, not because she understood what I meant, but because she realized I meant something. Richard let out a short laugh and looked around for support. That sounds mysterious, he said. Should we all be worried? More laughter, thinner this time. I did not answer him. I turned to Lauren instead. I am heading out, I said. You can ride home with whoever you plan to. Her expression tightened at that. Only for a second, but enough. There are sentences in a marriage that sound ordinary to everyone else and final to the two people inside it. That was one of them. Ethan, she said, quieter now, warning tucked beneath the softness. Do not do this here. I almost smiled at the irony. She thought I was the one doing something. I leaned in just enough, so only she could hear me. I did not, I said. You already did. Then I stepped back and gave the room the courtesy of no scene at all. No raised voice. No shattered glass. No final speech. Just silence, which is often heavier than outrage when it lands in the right place. I walked through the ballroom under the warm lights and past the decorated trees and polished executives, and with every step, the noise behind me seemed to dim. Outside, the December air hit cold and clean. Valet lights reflected off black sedans lined up along the curb. Downtown Dallas shimmered in the distance, all steel and glass and ambition. I stood there for one breath, then another, feeling the weight in my chest settle into something more useful than pain. My phone was already in my hand before I reached the bottom of the hotel steps. I scrolled past missed messages, past calendar reminders, past all the small machinery of a normal life that had just ended, and tapped a number I had not needed in almost 2 years. Marcus Reed picked up on the second ring. It is late, he said. That usually means one of two things. I looked back once at the ballroom windows glowing above me. It is both, I said. Clear my morning. We are done being patient. Marcus did not waste words, and that was one of the reasons I trusted him. Home or office? He asked. I unlocked my car and slid behind the wheel, the leather cold against my back. Home first, I said. Then office. I need the originals. He was quiet for half a beat, which for Marcus Reed counted as concern. Did something happen with Lauren? He asked. I looked through the windshield at the valet stand, at couples laughing under heaters, at men in tuxedos stepping into warmth like the night had never held anything sharp. Something finished, I said. That is what happened. He exhaled softly. I will be there in 30. I ended the call and pulled away from the curb, easing into the downtown traffic with the kind of control that only comes when the real storm has already moved inside you. Dallas at night looked expensive in December. Glass towers glowed against the dark, holiday lights wrapped around storefront trees, strings of white bulbs reflected in restaurant windows, where people leaned over cocktails and told each other the kind of lies that only sound elegant because the lighting is good. I drove north through streets I knew by memory, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting near my phone in case Lauren called. She did not. That told me more than a long argument would have. She was still upstairs in that ballroom, still trying to smooth over the moment, still deciding whether what happened was a marital issue, a professional inconvenience, or a temporary crack she could cover with the right tone tomorrow morning. The truth was simpler than that. She had been standing beside the collapse for months. Tonight she just gave it a microphone. By the time I reached our neighborhood, the city had softened into quiet streets, wide driveways, trimmed hedges, and the kind of homes that signal success without ever admitting how much of it is financed. Ours sat at the end of a cul-de-sac behind two live oaks wrapped in warm white lights Lauren had hired someone to install because she said it made the place look intentional. I parked in the driveway and killed the engine. The house stood there in perfect stillness, all clean lines and dark windows, like a model home waiting for a family that had not moved in yet. For a moment, I stayed in the car and listened to the silence. It is strange what your mind reaches for when something final has begun. Mine went back to the first time Lauren saw this house. She had walked into the kitchen, set her purse on the island, and turned in a slow circle under the pendant lights with that bright, disbelieving smile I had once considered proof that all the years of building had been worth it. "It feels solid," she said back then. I remember that because I had thought the same thing about us. I went inside through the garage entry, keyed in the code, and stepped into the mudroom with its built-in cabinets and neatly arranged winter coats. The house smelled faintly of cedar, lemon polish, and the candle Lauren always left burning in the front room when guests came over. Everything was in place. Shoes aligned, mail stacked, decorative bowls centered. There was something almost insulting about how ordinary it looked. Betrayal rarely announces itself through broken furniture or dramatic weather. Most of the time, it sits under warm lighting and expensive countertops and waits for you to notice that the air has changed. I loosened my tie as I walked down the hall and into my study. That room had always been mine in ways the rest of the house never fully was. Dark shelves, brass lamp, framed black and white photos from the early years. A walnut desk that had followed me through 3 offices and 1 apartment before we ever moved here. Lauren used to joke that the study felt like the room of a man who trusted paperwork more than people. She had said it laughing. The problem with jokes is that they often arrive wearing the truth. I crossed to the built-in shelves on the far wall and ran my fingers along the lower edge of a leather-bound volume no one had opened in years. The latch released with a soft internal click. Behind the shelf, recessed into the wall, sat a steel safe the size of a hotel minibar, matte black and silent and patient. I entered the code from memory. The door opened on the first try. Inside were the things that never needed decoration because their value lived in consequence. Original trust documents, signed restructuring agreements, board resolutions, stock control certificates, a sealed file marked with Helen Brooks's name, another with Marcus Reed's, and beneath them all, the document that mattered most, the one that turned a public company into a private misunderstanding for anyone arrogant enough not to read deeply enough. I pulled the folders out one by one and laid them across the desk in careful stacks. Years of restraint, reduced to paper and signatures. Anyone looking at me then would have seen a man in an expensive suit standing in lamplight over legal documents. What they would not have seen was the entire history pressed inside that moment. 15 years earlier, the company now paying for ballroom parties and executive bonuses had been 3/4 from collapse. Debt exposure, leadership failures, a product delay that spooked the market, and a board too proud to admit how close the whole machine was to failing. I had stepped in quietly because noise would have killed it. I bought what needed buying through layered entities, structured the rescue through a blind trust, and kept operational control where it belonged while securing the only thing that mattered to me then, actual authority. Not visible authority, real authority, voting authority, replacement authority, end-of-career authority. Lauren knew parts of that story. She never knew the scale. That had been deliberate. I told myself I was protecting normalcy, protecting her independence, protecting us from what power does when it walks into a marriage wearing its full name. Looking at those files spread under the amber light, I realized I had also been protecting her from the consequences of underestimating me. The front door alarm chimed softly in the distance. Someone had just come home. Lauren did not call out my name when she stepped inside. She called into the house the way people do when they still believe the structure around them is stable. "Ethan," she said, heels clicking lightly across the hardwood, voice carrying from the foyer into the long, quiet spine of the first floor. I did not answer right away. I let her hear the silence first. That mattered. Silence changes shape when it is no longer passive. It becomes a message. From my study, I could hear the small sounds of her return, the soft rustle of her coat being set down, the faint clink of keys on the entry table, the pause that comes when someone realizes the house feels different but cannot yet explain why. Then her steps moved closer, measured now, less certain. She appeared in the doorway a second later, still in that dark green dress, her makeup flawless under the warm lamplight, one hand resting against the frame as her eyes dropped from my face to the documents spread neatly across the desk. For the first time that night, Lauren looked unsettled. Not guilty, not ashamed, just unsettled, like she had walked into a meeting she had not prepared for. "What is all this?" she asked. There was no apology in her voice, no softness, just caution, sharpened by irritation. I leaned back in my chair and watched her take in the room. The lamp cast a low amber circle over the files, the safe still open behind me, the shelf shifted slightly out of place. She noticed everything. Lauren always noticed everything when the stakes involved appearances, leverage, or risk. That had once impressed me. Over the years, it had become harder to admire. "You came home earlier than I expected," I said. It was not an answer. "That, too," she noticed. Her jaw tightened. "You left a corporate event after threatening my boss in front of half the executive floor," she said. "Then you came home and opened a safe I did not know existed. I think I have earned an explanation." Earned. That word almost made me smile. It is amazing how certain people become of what they deserve when they have spent years ignoring what they have been given. I folded my hands and looked at her carefully, not at the dress or the jewelry or the polished version she wore for rooms full of people who mattered to her, but at the woman beneath all of it, the one I had spent a decade trying to believe was still somewhere close enough to reach. "Your boss laughed at me," I said. "You laughed with him." She let out a breath through her nose, frustrated already, as though we were discussing something embarrassingly emotional when she would have preferred logistics. "Richard made a stupid joke," she said. "It was a party. People were drinking. You are acting like this was some public execution." "It was public," I said, "and you were there." Her eyes hardened at that, not because she disagreed, but because I had taken away her room to reframe it. Lauren had become very good at that over the years, taking events and sanding down their edges until accountability looked dramatic and her choices looked reasonable. Missed anniversaries became scheduling conflicts. Coldness became exhaustion. Distance became maturity. And disrespect, apparently, became humor. She crossed her arms and stepped farther into the room. "You embarrassed me," she said quietly. That landed exactly where she intended it to, as a reversal, a repositioning of harm. I almost admired the precision. "No," I said. "I interrupted your evening. Those are different things." Her mouth parted slightly, then closed. For a second, she looked almost like the younger woman I used to know, the one who hated not having the upper hand, because underneath all her intelligence there had always been a fear of uncertainty. Then the boardroom version of her settled back into place. "Fine," she said. "What exactly is this? Because if this is some attempt to scare me, it is not going to work." I glanced down at the top folder and then back at her. I know. That answer bothered her more than anger would have. She moved to the desk and looked at the nearest document without touching it. Her eyes tracked the letterhead, the signatures, the legal language. I saw the moment recognition brushed against confusion. Not full understanding, just enough to make her cautious. "Why is Helen Brooks's name on that?" she asked. That was the first honest question of the night. Helen Brooks was chair of the board, and Lauren knew better than most people how insulated someone in that position was from ordinary internal politics. She also knew Helen did not lend her name to anything. Casual. I stood then, slowly, and gathered one of the folders into my hand. Lauren took a small step back, without meaning to. It was subtle, but I saw it. The room felt narrower all at once, the air heavier, the lamplight catching the edge of the page between my fingers. "Do you remember?" I asked. "About 6 years ago, When you asked me why I never came to your company events unless you insisted? She frowned, searching her memory while also trying to stay ahead of wherever I was taking this. You said corporate theater bored you, she said. That was part of it. I held the folder at my side and walked around the desk until we were facing each other with the papers between us like a third presence in the room. The other part, I said, was that I preferred not to sit in rooms where people casually discussed decisions they believed were theirs to make. Lauren stared at me, and something in her expression changed. Very slightly. Not understanding yet, but proximity to it. The kind of look people get when they hear thunder before they see the storm. Her eyes dropped once more to the documents on the desk, then lifted back to mine. Ethan, she said, more slowly now, what exactly are you saying? I held her gaze and let the silence stretch one beat longer than comfort would allow. Then I placed the folder in front of her, opened to the signature page, and watched the color begin to leave her face. Lauren did not touch the page at first. She just stared at it, her eyes moving from the corporate letterhead to the signatures, then back again as if reading the same lines twice might force them into a shape that made more sense. The room had gone so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the climate control pushing warm air through the vent above the shelves. A minute earlier, she had still been standing on familiar ground, the kind built from titles, assumptions, and the comfort of believing she understood the limits of the man in front of her. Now that ground was starting to give. This is not possible, she said at last, but her voice was thinner than before. It was not disbelief. Not really. It was resistance. I had heard that tone in boardrooms years ago when someone realized the numbers on the table had already decided the meeting before the discussion even began. I did not answer right away. I let her keep reading. The page she was looking at was not dramatic. No gold seal. No theatrical language. Just the kind of precise legal structure that changes who holds power without ever needing applause. The controlling trust had been built to remain invisible to anyone who only skimmed the top layer of the company. It did not need noise. It needed accuracy. Lauren swallowed and finally placed 2 fingers on the edge of the folder, careful, almost reluctant, as though the paper itself had become unstable. You are listed here as beneficial controller, she said quietly. That does not mean operational authority. It was the kind of sentence only someone in her world would reach for in a moment like that, a legal distinction used as emotional shelter. I gave a single nod. Keep reading. Her eyes moved lower, then stopped. There it was. Voting authority. Executive override under specified conditions. Board restructuring language. Emergency governance provisions. The architecture of real control, all resting beneath the polished corporate ladder she had spent years climbing one rung at a time. I watched the understanding arrive in stages. First confusion, then calculation, then something I had not seen on her face in a long time. Fear, not panic. Lauren was too disciplined for that. But fear has a way of cooling a person from the inside, and I could see it now in the slight tension around her mouth, in the way her shoulders had lost their polished ease. How long? She asked. It came out almost as a whisper. 15 years, I said. She looked up at me sharply. 15, she repeated, and now there was something raw in it, not because I had hurt her, but because she was suddenly forced to reevaluate every year she thought she fully understood. Since the restructuring after the third quarter collapse, I said. Since before Richard. Since before your promotion to regional counsel. Since before the new headquarters. Since before half the people at that party tonight ever put your company name on a business card. Lauren blinked once, slowly, and I knew her mind was racing back through old conversations, old evasions, old moments she must have dismissed as my privacy or my indifference. There had been clues, but clues only matter when someone respects the possibility that they are not the smartest person in the room. Why would you do that? She asked. Why would you hide something like this from me? That question might have landed differently years earlier. Tonight, it sounded less like a wife asking for honesty and more like an executive angry she had not been given access to critical information. I felt something in me settle colder. Because I loved you, I said. That stopped her. Really stopped her. I did not want our marriage turning into a hierarchy. I did not want every disagreement poisoned by the question of who had more leverage. I did not want you wondering if your career belonged to you or to my last name on paper. I paused, then added, and I did not want to become the kind of man who needs his power visible to feel respected. The words hung between us heavier than I expected. Lauren looked down again, but this time she was not reading. She was remembering. I could tell. There are silences in a marriage that sound like nostalgia until you realize they are actually inventory. She was counting backward now. The house. The vacations. The invitations I declined. The years I never once asked for favors from the company that quietly moved under my signature. The nights I listened while she talked about internal politics, knowing more than I ever said, and choosing restraint because I believed restraint protected something worth protecting. So all this time, she said slowly, you sat there and let me think. She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Let me think you were ordinary. Let me think you needed me more than I needed you. Let me think the room belonged to people like Richard. Let me think I could laugh, and there would be no cost. I met her eyes. Yes, I said. I let you think exactly what you wanted to think. That landed harder than any accusation would have. Lauren took one step back and folded her arms, but it was no longer defensive. Elegance. It was containment. Richard does not know, she said, and even in that moment she had gone to implications first. Not us. Not what she had done. Not the fact that her husband had looked at her tonight and seen a stranger in expensive shoes. No. She went straight to exposure, liability, damage control. No, I said. He does not. She pressed her lips together. Then this can still be handled. I almost laughed, but there was no humor left in me. Handled. Fixed. Managed. Sanded smooth and wrapped in language until the wound looked strategic instead of personal. That was what she still did not understand. This had stopped being a corporate matter the second she laughed. Marcus is on his way, I said. Helen will have what she needs before sunrise. There will be a board session in the morning. Her head lifted instantly. You cannot be serious. I have never been more serious. Over one stupid moment at a party, she asked, and now her voice cracked, not from heartbreak, but from disbelief that something she considered survivable had already crossed my line. I stepped closer to the desk and placed my hand on the top folder, the same one she had just read. It was not one moment, Lauren, I said. It was the first moment you made sure I saw clearly. At that exact second, headlights washed across the front windows, and a car door closed outside. Marcus had arrived. Marcus Reed entered the way serious men enter expensive houses when they already know the evening is beyond repair. No rush. No wasted motion. Dark overcoat, charcoal suit, leather briefcase in one hand, expression composed enough to make everyone else look emotional by comparison. I met him in the foyer before Lauren could move first. He gave me one look, then glanced past my shoulder toward the study where the safe still stood open and the documents were spread beneath the lamp. He did not ask if I was certain. Marcus had worked with me too long for that. Helen is awake, he said, handing me his phone. I told her only that governance action may be necessary before market open. She wants the package within the hour. I nodded once and passed the phone back. Behind me, Lauren stepped out. Of the study, posture straight, voice controlled, every inch the corporate professional trying to seize back a room that had slipped from her hands. Marcus, she said, too polished for the time of night. Before this becomes something theatrical, I would appreciate some clarity on what exactly Ethan thinks he is doing. Marcus turned to her with the same neutral respect he gave judges, bankers, and men holding bad news. Mrs. Cole, he said, I do not work from assumptions. I work from documents. That answer landed like a closed door. Lauren folded her arms, but I could see the strain now, the fine cracks under the lacquer. She was still beautiful, still composed, still carrying herself like a woman used to being the smartest voice in a room. The difference was that the room had changed. We all moved back into the study together. Marcus set his briefcase on the desk, slipped off his coat, and began reviewing the files with the kind of efficient precision that makes paperwork feel like a verdict. He checked signatures, dates, amendment language, emergency provisions, the special board authority clauses tied to executive conduct risk and fiduciary exposure. Lauren stood across from him, silent at first, then no longer able to help herself. This is disproportionate, she said. Whatever happened tonight, it does not justify a governance crisis. Marcus kept reading. That depends, he said, on whether tonight was an isolated insult or evidence of compromised executive judgment at the top of the company. Lauren looked at me sharply. You cannot possibly be framing this as a governance matter because Richard made a bad joke. No, I said. I am framing it as the moment I stopped pretending character flaws at the top were harmless. Her eyes flashed thin, not with sadness, but with anger finally stripped of its management tone. You are doing this because you are embarrassed. I almost answered too quickly, but I did not. Men make mistakes when they answer from injury instead of clarity. I looked at her for a long second and let the truth settle before I spoke. I am doing this because I finally understand the difference between being private and being invisible, I said. And because tonight showed me exactly how far your judgment has drifted if you could stand beside that man and laugh. The room went still again. Marcus continued turning pages, but more slowly now, absorbing not just the documents but the shape of what sat underneath them. He had seen marriages end in cleaner rooms than this, and for smaller reasons. The problem was never one bad night. It was always the pattern the night revealed. Lauren looked away first. She moved toward the window, arms still folded, staring out into the dark backyard where the pool lights cast pale reflections over the stone. For a moment, the house held nothing but the quiet rustle of paper and the faint ticking of the brass clock on my shelf. Then she said, "You should have told me." Not loudly, not dramatically, just low and tight, like a sentence she hated even as she said it. I leaned one hand against the desk. Would it have changed tonight? She did not answer. That silence was answer enough. Marcus closed one folder and opened another. "I need to be precise," he said. "If we move before sunrise, Helen can call an emergency governance review under the executive conduct and confidence provisions. That allows immediate suspension of discretionary authority pending board examination. It does not remove Richard permanently, but it locks the room before he can rearrange the furniture." Lauren turned from the window. "You are talking about my boss like this is already decided." "No," Marcus said evenly. "I am talking about procedure because procedure is what remains when trust fails." Lauren stared at him, then at me, and for the first time since she came home, I saw something beneath the strategy. Not remorse. Not yet. Something closer to shock that the man she had learned to read so casually had chosen a line and meant it. "Ethan," she said, softer now, "think about what tomorrow becomes if you do this. The board, the press, the markets, my position, everything connected to this company." I heard every word she did not say. Our marriage, our life, our name. But she still led with the company. That told me all I needed to know. I said. "That is why Marcus is here." He slid a legal pad from his briefcase and began making a short list in his clean, deliberate handwriting. "Notify Helen. Secure board packet. Freeze executive discretionary actions. Preserve internal communications. Draft special session notice." The words were plain, but their weight was not. Lauren watched the list form line by line as if each item were a step closing behind her. "You are not leaving me any room," she said. I met her eyes across the desk, across the documents, across the years I had spent mistaking restraint for mutual respect. "No," I said. "I am finally leaving myself some." Marcus finished writing and tore off the page for me to review. At the bottom, in smaller letters, he had added one final line. "Separate personal counsel if marital conflict may intersect with corporate exposure." I read it once, then set it down. The study felt colder than before, though the heat was still running. Maybe that is what truth does when it finally stops whispering. It does not explode. It lowers the temperature. Marcus checked his watch. "If we are doing this," he said, "Helen needs the signed authorization in the next 15 minutes. Lauren looked at me then, not as if I were her husband, not even as if I were a stranger, but as if I were a decision she had badly misjudged. "You would really pull the floor out from under all of this tonight?" she asked. I looked at the documents, the safe, the room that had held my silence for years, and then back at the woman who had laughed while another man tested how small I could be made to feel. "No," I said. Tonight just showed me the floor was already gone. Lauren stood motionless for a second after I said it, like the words had reached her body a beat later than her ears. Then she laughed once, quietly, without humor. It was the kind of laugh people use when reality offends their sense of control. "You are being dramatic," she said. "That is what this is. You are hurt, and now you want to turn one ugly moment into a corporate earthquake." Marcus did not look up from the papers. "Corporate earthquakes are usually caused by small cracks ignored too long," he said. Lauren shot him a look, then turned back to me. "Do not do that," she said. "Do not let him turn this into some larger moral issue." This is between us. The problem was that even then she still did not mean us. She meant containment. She meant private damage, sealed doors, careful voices, and a version of tomorrow where Richard kept his office. She kept her standing, and I accepted some polished apology like a man grateful to be invited back into rooms that had already made up their mind about him. I signed the authorization without rushing. The pen moved steadily across the paper, black ink on clean white stock, nothing dramatic about it. But there are signatures that feel louder than arguments. This was one of them. Marcus took the page, reviewed it once, and slid it into his folio. I will send the packet to Helen now, he said. Board notice goes out before 6. Lauren stared at the signed line as if she could still will it back into blank paper. Ethan, she said, and this time my name came out differently. No edge, no performance, just disbelief. You cannot undo something like that once it starts. I met her eyes. That is the point. She took a breath, steadied herself, then changed tactics the way smart people do when the first argument fails. Let us stop pretending this is about governance, she said. You are punishing Richard because he humiliated you. No, I said. I am responding to what tonight revealed. Which is what? She asked. That he is arrogant? That executives drink too much and say stupid things at parties? Welcome to corporate America. I could have answered with Richard's words, with the memory of her laughter, with the years of slow erosion that had led us here. But none of that would have reached her yet. Lauren was still thinking in categories she could survive. I needed to say it plainly. It revealed that the people running your company have confused title with character, I said. And it revealed that my wife no longer recognizes the difference. That landed. I saw it in the way her posture shifted, in the tiny tightening around her eyes. For the first time all night, she looked less like an executive and more like a woman standing at the edge of a truth she did not want. That is unfair, she said, but there was less certainty in it now. Is it? I asked. You watched another man reduce me to a punchline in front of a room full of people, and your first instinct when you came home was not regret. It was irritation, then strategy, then damage control. Even now you are talking about optics, markets, and your position. Not us. Her lips parted, then pressed together again. She looked away. The silence that followed was not clean. It was crowded with things both of us could name if we wanted to suffer honestly for once. The late nights. The dinners where she checked her phone under the table. The way she had started introducing me with less and less detail, as if keeping me vague made her more legible to the room. The careful distancing. The polished corrections. The slow conversion of a marriage into an arrangement with decent furniture and excellent lighting. Marcus stepped aside to make the call to Helen, his voice low and precise near the bookshelf, leaving the two of us standing across from each other in the study that had held more truth in the last hour than the rest of the house had seen in years. Lauren moved closer to the desk, her hands resting on the edge now, fingers splayed against the wood. What do you want me to say? She asked quietly. That question broke something in me more than the laughter had. Not because it was cruel, but because it was so revealing. She was still looking for the correct line, the sentence that would stabilize the scene, the phrasing that might reset the board. She was not asking from remorse. She was asking from skill. I shook my head slowly. Nothing, I said. If you had known what to say, you would have said it before now. Her eyes lifted to mine, and there it was at last, not full remorse, not even confession, but the first real sign that she understood language had stopped being enough. I did not think, she said. No, I replied. You did not. Those 4 words sat between us like a final diagnosis. Outside, the wind moved lightly through the trees in the backyard, brushing the windows with a faint whisper. Somewhere upstairs, the house settled with a quiet creak, the ordinary sound of weight adjusting inside a frame. Marcus returned a moment later. Helen has the file, he said. She is contacting the independent directors now. Confidentiality holds until notice is issued, but not for long. Richard will know before dawn that something is moving. Lauren turned toward him sharply. You told her tonight? I told her enough, Marcus said. The rest is in the documents. Lauren looked back at me, and for the first time since she walked into the study, she seemed smaller. Not weak, just suddenly aware that power had been in the room all along, and she had mistaken quiet for absence. If Richard goes down, she said slowly, the entire executive floor gets dragged into review. Legal included. Me included. Yes, I said. She swallowed. So this affects me too. I held her gaze. You were already affected. You just did not notice until the consequences had your name on them. That was when the mask finally slipped. Just a little. Her shoulders lowered. Her face changed. Not enough to call it surrender, but enough to see the woman under the polish straining against the reality closing in around her. I made a mistake, she said. It was the closest thing to honesty I had heard from her all night. I wish it had reached me sooner. I wish it had sounded like it came from the place in her that once loved me without translation. But timing matters. Some truths arrive after the bridge is already gone. Yes, I said. You did. Marcus closed his folio. You should both get some rest, he said, though we all knew no one in that house was sleeping. By morning, this stops being private. I looked at the documents, at the safe still open, at the room that smelled faintly of paper, cedar, and cooled anger. Then I looked at Lauren, who had spent years standing near my silence and mistaking it for limitation. It was never private, I said. It was just hidden. Marcus left a few minutes later, not because the work was done, but because the next moves no longer required conversation inside my house. They required timing. He paused at the front door, gave me a short nod, and said he would call the moment Helen confirmed the independent directors were secured. Then he stepped out into the cold, and the door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded far too ordinary for what had just been set in motion. Lauren and I stood in the foyer for a moment after that, two people inside a beautiful home that suddenly felt like a showroom after hours. The Christmas lights outside still glowed through the windows. The garland still hung along the staircase. Somewhere in the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed with the boring confidence of appliances that do not care when a life changes shape around them. Lauren folded her arms again, but this time it looked less like control and more like she was holding herself together by force. So what now, she asked. No edge, no sarcasm, just exhaustion wrapped in disbelief. I loosened the knot of my tie and slipped it free, draping it over the back of a chair by the entry table. Now, I said, you decide whether you want the truth or just the part of it that might still be useful. She stared at me as if the sentence offended her, but not because it was false, because it was precise. Lauren had always preferred truths that arrived polished enough to survive in public. The raw kind made her uncomfortable. You are acting like I betrayed you, she said quietly. I looked at her for a long second, long enough for the words to settle between us and expose themselves. You did, I said. Maybe not in the way that makes headlines. Maybe not in the kind of way that comes with hotel receipts or hidden messages. But yes, Lauren, you did. She flinched at that, and for the first time all night it was not because of the company, the board, or Richard Haynes. It was because I had named the wound in plain language and left her nowhere to file it except where it belonged. She turned away from me and walked into the kitchen, one hand brushing the marble island as if she needed contact with something solid. I followed more slowly. The under-cabinet lights cast a low glow across the counters, turning the room soft and almost intimate, which made the distance between us feel even colder. Lauren poured herself a glass of water and drank half of it standing there in silence. Then she set the glass down and said, I did not sleep with another man. I did not lie to you about where I was. I did not steal from you. So if you are going to use a word like betrayal, at least be honest about what you are accusing me of. There it was. The lawyer's mind, defining the term narrowly enough to survive it. I leaned one shoulder against the doorway and watched her. I am accusing you, I said, of standing beside my humiliation because it made your world easier. I am accusing you of shrinking me in public so you could keep fitting into rooms that reward contempt dressed as wit. I am accusing you of seeing me clearly enough to know I was hurt and deciding that protecting your standing mattered more than protecting your husband. The kitchen went very still after that. Lauren did not answer right away. She looked down at the island, then out toward the dark backyard, then finally back at me. You think that is what I chose? She asked. I know it is, I said, because when you came home, you were not grieving what happened between us. You were calculating what it might cost. She closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, something in her face had softened, but not into innocence, more into fatigue. The kind that comes when someone has been managing too much for too long and can no longer tell whether they are holding things together or strangling them. Do you know what it is like in those rooms? She asked, her voice lower now. Do you know what it takes to survive there? Every dinner, Every meeting, every mistake remembered, every hesitation punished. I worked for that company for 11 years. I fought for every promotion, every seat at every table, every ounce of credibility. Men like Richard test everyone. If you react to every ugly comment, you become the problem. If you let it slide, you stay in the game. I listened without interrupting. Not because I agreed, but because sometimes people reveal themselves most clearly when they think they are defending themselves. So you let him laugh at me to stay in the game, I said. She swallowed. I did not think it would go this far. That is not an answer. Her jaw tightened. No, she said after a beat. It is not. I looked around the kitchen then, at the imported tile, the polished fixtures, the bowl of pears arranged for no reason except appearance. We had built a careful life in this house, the kind people admire from driveways and Christmas cards. But careful is not the same as honest. I had mistaken the two for years because honesty is harder to measure when it leaves no broken glass behind. Do you remember our first apartment in Fort Worth? I asked. Lauren blinked, caught off guard by the turn. Of course I do. You cried the first week because the hot water ran out after 10 minutes. A faint, unwilling smile touched her mouth and disappeared just as quickly. You said if this was success, it was underwhelming. And you said it was temporary, she replied. I nodded. It was temporary because we were building something. Together. I never cared whether we looked rich. I cared whether we stayed real. Her eyes lowered again, and I knew she understood the word I had chosen. Real. Not elegant. Not strategic. Not impressive. Real. Somewhere along the way, I said, you stopped seeing me as part of what you were building and started seeing me as something you had to position. She drew in a slow breath, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost almost all of its polish. That is not how it felt from the inside. No, I said, because from the inside, compromise rarely announces itself. It just keeps asking for one more inch. That landed harder than I expected. Lauren sat down on one of the bar stools, all at once looking less like the woman from the ballroom and more like someone who had finally run out of places to stand. Her dress still shimmered softly under the kitchen lights, but the effect was gone now. Glamour depends on illusion, and illusion had not survived the study. What happens to me tomorrow? She asked, and there was no hiding in the question this time. It was not just about her job. It was about the life attached to it. The version of herself she had spent years refining. I answered honestly. That depends on what is in your emails, what you knew, what you signed off on, and whether your judgment looks independent or compromised when the board starts asking questions. She stared at me, not angry now, just stripped of certainty. You would let them come after me too? I took a breath before answering because the truth mattered more than the softness of it. I am not sending them after you, I said. I am stepping out of the way of what your choices already set in motion. The house was silent again after that. Then my phone vibrated in my pocket. One short message from Marcus. Helen confirmed. Notice draft in progress. Special session at 8:30. Preserve all executive communications. I read it once and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Lauren noticed the movement immediately. What is it? She asked. I looked at her across the kitchen island, at the woman I had loved long enough to give my silence the benefit of the doubt, and I answered with the calm that had carried me this far. Morning just arrived early, I said. Lauren did not move for a few seconds after I said it. She just sat there on the bar stool with one hand near the glass of water and the other resting flat against the marble, as if the kitchen island had become the only stable thing left in the room. The under-cabinet lights cast a soft glow across her face, and for the first time that night, she looked tired in a way makeup could not fix. Not physically tired, structurally tired. Like the scaffolding she had used to hold up her life was still standing, but every bolt had started to loosen at once. 8:30, she asked finally. Her voice was quiet enough that if I had not been watching her, I might have missed the tremor under it. Yes, I said. Special session. She gave a short nod, almost to herself, then let out a breath that sounded less like relief and more like resignation. Richard will lose his mind. Probably, I said. That will not help him. Lauren looked up at me then, and the old instincts returned to her face for a second, quick and sharp, the instinct to assess, triangulate, salvage. He is going to call people, she said. He will call finance. He will call the general counsel. He will call the board members he thinks he can lean on. He will try to get ahead of it before the notice lands. That is why communications are being preserved before dawn, I said. He can make calls. He cannot outrun what is already filed. She turned that over in her mind, and I could almost see the machinery working behind her eyes, the invisible map of internal loyalties, weak points, favored narratives, executives who would freeze under pressure, and executives who would smile, while quietly moving their own chairs away from the blast radius. Corporate people always talk about leadership like it is vision. Most of the time it is just panic with better tailoring. Helen would not do this lightly, Lauren said after a moment. It was not really a question. No, I said. She would not. Another silence settled between us, but this one felt different. Less defensive, less loud. The kind that comes after the argument underneath the argument has finally been named. She picked up the water glass again, took a small sip, and set it down more carefully than before. Did you ever plan to tell me? She asked. It was almost midnight. The board was waking up. Her boss was walking toward a cliff he did not know was there, and somehow that question still made it through. Maybe because when people lose the illusion of control, they start searching backward for the first missed doorway. I considered lying, not to manipulate her, just to spare both of us the full weight of the truth. But mercy can become dishonesty when it arrives too late. I planned to tell you if I ever felt the truth would be held with respect, I said. Not curiosity, not advantage. Respect. Her expression shifted at that, and this time the hurt on her face was real. Small, but real. That is a brutal thing to say. It is a brutal thing to realize. She looked down at the counter again, and I knew she was replaying years now. Not just the party, not just tonight, but the 1,000 smaller moments that had built the road here. The dinners where she corrected my tone in front of colleagues. The introductions where I became my husband Ethan, and then eventually just Ethan, as if context itself had become a burden. The way she had stopped asking what I thought and started assuming what I could understand. Disrespect almost never arrives wearing a costume. It comes dressed as familiarity. I did respect you, she said quietly. In my way, maybe not always in the right way, but I did. I leaned against the counter opposite her and studied the woman I had married. No, I said. You respected what I did for the structure of your life. That is different. She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, there was no anger there. Just a kind of unguarded sadness that made the kitchen feel older than it was. You think I used you. I think you got used to me, I said. So used to me being steady, available, quiet, and unshakable that you stopped noticing what any of that cost. That one landed deep. I saw it in the way her shoulders dropped, in the way she looked past me for a second, as if some private memory had reached out and touched her hard enough to make standing in the present more difficult. There were years, she said slowly, when I thought you did not need much from me. You never complained. You never demanded attention. You never tried to control anything. You always seemed above the politics, above the noise. I told myself that was strength. I gave a small nod. And then, she met my eyes. And then I started treating it like permission. The honesty in that sentence changed the air in the room. Not because it repaired anything. It did not. But because it was the first sentence all night that did not sound engineered. I stood very still, feeling the quiet open around us like a field after a storm has passed through but left the clouds hanging low. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. Her mouth moved like she wanted to say something else, something softer or sharper, or maybe simply more useful. But before she could, her phone lit up on the counter. The screen flashed with Richard Haynes's name. Bright, immediate, demanding. Lauren stared at it without touching it. On the second ring, she looked at me. If I answer, he will ask what I know. Yes, I said. And if I do not answer, he will know something is wrong. Also yes. She let it ring once more, then silenced it without picking up. The quiet that followed felt heavier than the ringing had. That is the first time I have ever ignored his call, she said, almost to herself. I glanced at the phone. Get used to first times. She almost smiled at that, but it did not fully happen. Her screen lit up again. Not a call this time, but a text message preview. Call me now. What is happening? The word sat there glowing against the dark glass like panic, trying to look authoritative. Lauren turned the phone face down. He is scared, she said. Good, I replied. He should be. She looked at me then, and there was a trace of surprise in her face, not because I sounded harsh, but because I sounded resolved in a way she was only now beginning to understand. You really are done protecting everyone, are you not? she asked. I thought about that for a moment. About Richard. About the board. About Lauren. About the countless small concessions I had made over the years in the name of peace, privacy, professionalism, marriage, decency. About how often men confuse endurance with virtue simply because they are praised for not making a mess. No, I said. I am done protecting people from the meaning of what they chose. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was an email notification from the board distribution list. She looked at the sender line, and I saw her face change before she even opened it. He got the notice, she said. No, I told her. He got the warning that the notice exists. There is a difference. She opened the email anyway. Her eyes moved left to right, scanning quickly, legal language colliding with personal reality in real time. Special governance review. Executive conduct concern. Attendance mandatory. Preservation directive effective immediately. No deletion, no modification, no private device transfers. She lowered the phone slowly. It is real, she said, and for the first time all night those 3 words carried no strategy at all. I looked at the kitchen around us, at the perfect counters, the dim lights, the expensive quiet, and I realized how strange it was that truth had chosen this room to finally sit down. It always was, I said. Upstairs, the house remained dark and still, but the night no longer felt private. Somewhere downtown, men in good suits were waking up to emails they could not ignore. Somewhere on the other end of the city, Richard Haynes was probably standing in his kitchen in formal shoes, staring at his phone and realizing that laughter can be the most expensive sound a man ever makes. Lauren looked at me one more time, and when she spoke, her voice had gone soft enough to sound almost fragile. What do I do now? I held her gaze and answered with the only thing left that still resembled mercy. You tell the truth before the room decides you were never going to.